but I'll start with the early years. So my son's now 19 years old. He was very easy birth. He was a very early talker. He was talking by 12 months, and then he stopped talking for about 3 or 4 months for no apparent reason, and then started talking again. First started to realise there was something different about him in nursery, because he would grab a hold of other children and he wouldn't let go of them, and they would become quite distressed. But all he wanted to do, I think, was to be their friend and play with them. And he thought that was how you did it. And that behaviour continued until he was in about year 2 at school, when it slowly started to change. Things went fine in reception. Things went fine in year 1. He had an excellent teacher, quite an old-fashioned teacher in year 1, who was very strict, lots of rules, and thought that it was a very good idea when the boys were struggling and squirmy to send them out with a ball to learn their alphabet outside, bouncing a ball to each other. And it worked really well. They were great. Come year 2, everything fell apart, mainly because the teacher didn't have any structure at all, and Adam couldn't cope without any structure. So when he hit year 3, he was thrown out of every single class. He was very physically violent at home, biting, spitting, kicking, punching, nutting. And this went on for about 3 or 4 years, which as a parent is absolutely soul-destroying. All you want to do is hug them. And when they're going through a meltdown, when they're absolutely distraught, they don't normally want you to touch them. And it's only afterwards, when they're coming out of it and they've recovered a little bit, then they do want real hugs off you normally. Or they want to come up and hug you and touch you and push against you if they can't take contact from you. My son was put on Ritalin because he also had ADHD, and that did actually help. That reduced the violence and helped him focus when he was at school. He started to do really well academically and would have been top of the class. And then, because of the side effects, he came off Ritalin himself, and things started to fall apart again. He wasn't violent anymore, but if he couldn't handle anything or cope with anything, he used to go and hide away somewhere, and I would find him with just tears running down his face. He wouldn't want to talk to me, he wouldn't want me in the room with him, he wouldn't want me to touch him. So I had to wait until he was ready to come out, and he wouldn't be able to verbalise at all what the problem was. He never really told me anything, and certainly up until, I would say, year 6, when he was on the Ritalin, I would say maybe once a year I would see what I thought was my real child, Adam, where he would talk and he would open up a little bit. The rest of the time I'd be lucky if I got more than a single word out of him. And I'd have a day where he seemed focused and he would talk, and I'd get a little window and see what my child could have been. So Adam has a few sensory issues. I think he has a lot more sensory issues than any of us actually realise. And I think at 19, he's starting to be able to verbalise some of the issues, some of the problems he has to do with his autism and his ADHD. But it's still a learning process for me and for him. When he was very small, he seemed to have quite a high pain threshold. So he had quite a few injuries. I remember when he broke his finger at school, he'd come out of school, he'd met with my childminder who'd taken him to the soft play because it was a Friday, and they went to soft play and had a slice of pizza and some chips on a Friday. And he came downstairs when I came to pick him up and he said, "Mum, I've got a broken finger," but the childminder wouldn't believe him. And so he came up to me and he said, "I'm sure it's broken." And I looked at it and I said, "Yes, I think it probably is." But he was supposed to be going for a sleepover that night, so we refused to go to the hospital and have it looked at. Instead, my friend agreed to take him with his broken finger, and he was staying in the soft play because his friend who he was having the sleepover was coming over to the soft play, and he played for the rest of the night in the soft play with his broken finger. We've also had broken arms from the soft play, which was a really nasty broken arm where he required surgery. And he was actually laughing when we were waiting to be seen in A&E. And when he broke his leg, although initially in a lot of pain, once he's got through the shock of it, it's as if things are fine, they're okay. So he doesn't seem to feel pain in quite the same way. And yet if he's got the tiniest little mark on his hand, he's dying because it's really painful. So the way he senses pain seems to be completely back to front. The way he senses heat and cold seems to be completely back to front. So in the winter, he's commonly seen running around in a pair of shorts. And in the summer, he'll have a coat zipped right up with the hood pulled over, and full-length trousers on, sweating. And you don't know why he's doing that. He went through a year at school where he would not take his school uniform off. And that was including on the weekends because his school uniform was comfortable, and he was used to it. So he used to sleep in it. He still likes to sleep in his clothes. He will not sleep in pyjamas. And he likes that certain things have to fit in a certain way. So he's never been bothered about labels particularly, but he doesn't like seams around his cuffs, and things have to feel a certain way when he's got them on. So I went through a lot of clothes where I would buy them for him and he would never wear them, or I would take them back because they were no good. Shoes were a real problem, shoes and socks, because he wouldn't let anybody touch his toes, and his toenails used to grow into the bottom of his toes. And he would also get blisters on the end of his toes because he didn't want to go into a bigger shoe. So he wouldn't actually wear bigger shoes. He wanted the tightness of the shoe, and the laces had to be pulled so tight that the middle bit of the shoe was crossing. So when we went into Clark's to get him new shoes, he would get measured, as to do with all kids, and then I would ask for the size below what they recommended because he wouldn't wear the size that they were recommending. And to cut his toenails, I used to have to wait until he was asleep. And sometimes, if I was lucky, I would manage to get them cut. But he does cut them himself now, and we have no problems with that. But he still wears socks a size smaller than they should be, and he pulls them very tight on his feet. Had quite a broad diet when he was young. He did try quite a lot of things, but the older he got, the narrower his diet got. Until probably when he was on the Ritalin, we were struggling to get any food into him, and we were told just to give him whatever we could. And unfortunately, that led to quite a poor diet. But since then, we've been working to try and broaden his diet again. And it slowly is starting to broaden, so it's not just pizza and sausage and chips. But he has a real problem with texture in food and taste as well. Very sensitive taste and very sensitive smell. So for instance, if I'm cooking in the kitchen, he used to like to come and help me. And I was making a roux sauce once, and as the sauce thickened, he would start to retch. So he would have to leave the kitchen I would add more milk, and as soon as I added more milk, he could come in and stir it for me. And then as soon as the sauce started to thicken, he would start retching again and have to leave the kitchen. He also used to struggle with, particularly if I was eating curry when we were out, so I would have to go and sit on a separate table because he couldn't stand to be beside me when I was eating something really spicy or strong. And with most foods which have ends, he wouldn't eat the ends. So fish fingers, he wouldn't eat the ends of fish fingers. Sausages, he wouldn't eat the ends of sausages. Chips, he doesn't eat the end of chips. So you have a little pile left on the plate. And he tends to eat with his fingers. Even now, he still eats with his fingers more than he probably should. Although he's much better at using a knife and fork now. It's not the physically, he can't use a knife and fork, he can. It's just he prefers to eat with his hands. The biggest problem in trying to broaden his diet we have at the moment is vegetables. He would like to become more healthy, he wants to eat more vegetables, but he doesn't like the texture of cooked vegetables. He finds all cooked vegetables are slimy, even though I've promised that we wouldn't cook them too much so that they remain quite firm. So we're still working on that one. One of the things I think it's really important to say is that as a parent of a child, particularly if you don't have a diagnosis or you don't have a full understanding necessarily of what's going on with your child, or even if you do, when you come into hospital, if your child isn't behaving in the same way as most people would expect children to do, you actually feel as if people are almost looking at you and judging you, which as a parent is a really hard thing because you can feel already a failure because everything, when you have a child with special needs, is a struggle, whatever that special needs is. The experiences I had was we would quite often be late for appointments or we would miss appointments because my son had such a disrupted sleep, I wouldn't be able to get him out of bed to get to an appointment, or if he felt the appointment wasn't necessary, he would point blank refuse to go to the appointment. And I've seen us go to a paediatric appointment where I've been in with the paediatrician and my son's actually been sat out in the car because he didn't think it was important that he needed to go and see the doctor about him. We also struggled a lot with dental to the point that he was referred into the dental hospital because we couldn't manage normal dental appointments. He wouldn't let the dentist anywhere near him or look in his mouth for about 45 to 50 minutes. We really struggled with dental hospital appointments because we would quite often miss them because with his sleep being disrupted, he wouldn't get up to come to the appointments. And so I would be really upset because quite often I'd get, even though I phoned on the day to cancel the appointment and explain why, I would still get a letter to say that we hadn't attended, that we did not attend. And that used to really upset me because it was as if we'd done that on purpose and actually it was something we couldn't do anything about. And when we did come into the dental hospital, it would take about 50 minutes before my son would let anybody look in his mouth. And when he did, he'd keep on closing it. So it'd be a bit like a goldfish. So he'd be opening and closing his mouth and expecting the dentist to be able to do something in that very short period of time. And gradually over, I think it was probably 3 years, we went from 50 minutes to maybe half an hour. He would let the dentist look in his mouth, but what he would do was he'd pull the plastic pinny over his head, and he would make a hole just so the dentist could actually look in his mouth, and then he would put the protective glasses on top of the apron. And he would actually let the dentist look in his mouth then. And that continued for about a year and a half. to his very last appointment, which he had in the dental hospital, where he had something that was unusual. And so they actually managed to get all the dental students to come over and the other consultants to come and have a look in his mouth. And he opened his mouth immediately, so there was no delay. So that was massive progress from where we started. But we still struggle to get in because we still have sleeping problems. When he was young, when he was at school, in primary school, quite often on the way into school, he would hide himself under my coat. So he would completely hide himself under my coat as we were walking into school. And occasionally I'd see him when I went into school hiding with a jumper or something pulled over his head. So, and sometimes in the car as well, we'd go around and he'd pull a blanket over the top of his head. So all I can assume is it was a similar thing to that, where he was just trying to shut everything else out so he could cope with what was happening. I mean, certainly, I missed saying earlier, when he was at school, we didn't know this was happening. We found out of him eventually when he mentioned it, when he was probably in year 3, year 4. He'd spent all of his time from when he started school being left out, which we actually saw. We observed that happening, where he tried to join in with the other kids and they ran off and they pushed him and they went away and left him. But also what we found out was when it all became too much with him from a sensory point of view, because it was too loud, he described it as too loud, too noisy, he would go and hide in the corner of the yard, somewhere where he could be quiet and stay away from the noise. And we didn't actually know this, and nobody from the school told us this. With Adam having quite a few accidents when he was younger, breaking arms and breaking fingers, and he needed surgery a couple of times for other things as well. We found out when he was quite young, he was 4 or 5 when he went in for his first big major surgery, and there was absolutely no way he was going to let them anywhere near him with a mask to put him to sleep. And actually for Adam, he felt totally at ease having an injection. So he didn't mind being put off to sleep with a needle. And to the point where when he was about 8 years old, he wasn't even bothered if he didn't have EMLA on his skin, because a needle for him was not a problem. But if you tried to bring a mask anywhere near his face, he would be kicking and screaming. From my experience, and from the experience of a lot of other parents who I've talked to over the years, it's all pretty similar. Any children with Asperger's, with autism, with ADHD, with sensory problems, it's a constant battle, because most people in education, in the health service, your friends, your family, just don't get it. They really don't understand it, and that can leave you feeling like a really poor parent. It can leave teachers, I would suspect, feeling as if they're not doing a great job as well, because they don't know why it's not working with this child. And I would imagine also with health service professionals, where something that's worked with other kids or would normally work with kids just isn't working with this child. But as a parent, you're living with it all the time. You're living with it every day. I'm not going to lie, it's difficult all the way through. My son's 19. I'm still having to battle for him and to battle to help him achieve what I think he's capable of achieving, and support him in learning how to live as independently as he can moving forward. We've undergone a bit of a transformation in the last 2 years. So he still has massive sleeping problems, he still has his sensory problems, but as he gets older, he's learning how to manage them and how to deal with them, so that he can cope with most things, and he knows when he's going to struggle. It doesn't mean we can make things necessarily easy for him, but it means he can do things and he can learn things, and he is slowly progressing. So from having 41% attendance at college 2 years ago, we're now at the dizzy heights of 97% attendance at college. And last year he achieved the equivalent of 4 GCSEs actually, which at one point I never thought I would see him do. And he's now started A-level equivalent course and he's loving it. He's absolutely loving it. And I can see a future for him. It's just taken a bit longer to get there.